I miss you. Who will take care of me now that you're gone? Who will I believe in now?
Unaware her husband's family had mocked her at her father's funeral, they had no idea what was coming when the will was read. He didn't just mock her. He humiliated her at her lowest moment, right beside her father's coffin in front of every guest, while his mother whispered poison into his ear, and the woman he secretly spent nights with stood behind him, smiling. A few days after losing the only man who ever truly protected her, Amara Johnson walked into the funeral hall, her grief still raw, her father's final warning still echoing in her heart. Do not trust them, Amara. She hadn't understood what he meant then, but she was about to find out. Welcome to Black Stories. If you are new here, you are right on time. Subscribe, drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from, and stay until the very end because this story is not what it looks like yet. Amara Johnson Shin, 32 years old, rushed forward before the panic could fully rise inside her chest. Her father's breathing had caught in one uneven lift, and for a second she feared it would be the last. She placed a trembling hand over his, whispering soft comfort until his chest steadied again. Only then did she allow herself to exhale. The dim lamplight painted the room in a warm glow, but the warmth felt borrowed, held together by habit, not hope. Amara adjusted the pillow beneath her father's head with a practiced gentleness. She had done this every night for months, ever since his health collapsed. A portable monitor hummed quietly beside the bed, its weak green lights blinking. His wrist still carried a faded hospital band, a small sign of how long she had been fighting for his comfort at home instead of keeping him in a ward. She had brought him to Seoul to be close to her in his final months, refusing to let him spend them alone in Atlanta. Amara wasn't the kind of woman who complained. She never had been. She had lived a quiet life built on small sacrifices and quiet loyalty. Growing up as the only child of Raymond Johnson, a steady, disciplined Black American man who had built his modest company in Atlanta brick by brick, she learned responsibility young. Her mother passed when she was 12, and Raymond filled both roles without hesitation. He showed her how to balance accounts, track household records, and read contracts, not because he expected her to need them, but because he wanted her to never depend on anyone blindly. Flashbacks blurred into the present as she sat beside him now. She remembered his calm voice teaching her how to sign her name correctly, how to read the fine print others ignored, how to stand firm when people tried to make her feel small. At the time she thought he was teaching her adulthood. Now she realized he had been teaching her protection. Her father, even in weakness, held on to dignity. She had inherited that from him. Quiet strength, not money. She hadn't grown up wealthy. Raymond managed a small family company and lived simply. Over the years, everything he earned, every property, every account, he placed carefully into arrangements she didn't fully understand. When she asked, he would smile and say, "You'll understand it when you need to." He never bragged, never boasted, but now she suspected he was preparing something he wanted her to know, something he had guarded fiercely. Tonight she read him an old letter she had written when she was 16. He had kept it folded at the bottom of his drawer, the ink smudged by time but not forgotten. Her voice shook slightly as she read, remembering the girl she used to be. Hopeful, sensitive, trusting. Her father's eyes opened a little weak but focused only on her. "Amara," he whispered, the word fragile but urgent. She leaned closer, brushing a stray gray hair from his forehead. "Yes, Dad, listen to me. When I'm gone," his voice thinned like fatting thread, "promise me you will protect what I've protected for you." Amara frowned. His tone held something she didn't understand, something he was almost afraid to say. "What do you mean?" Protect what? Raymond Johnson's eyes shifted toward the doorway just for a moment, as if someone might be listening from the hallway outside the bedroom, as if this house, which had always felt safe, now had corners she should be wary of. Before he could answer, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. The vibration cut through the silence like a rude knock, a message from her husband. Shin Yi-won, 38 years old. To the outside world, a real estate mogul. To those who knew better, a man whose name made people step aside in rooms before he entered them. The head of the Shin family. A Korean Mafia boss who wore his power like a second skin. "Be home early. My mother wants to talk to you." Again, the words tightened her chest. For months, Amara had been splitting her time between her father's house and the Shin family compound. But most nights she stayed here. Conversations with Yi-won's mother felt like walking through a field of hidden traps. Madam Shin always found a way to remind Amara she wasn't Korean enough, wasn't refined enough by their standards, wasn't the right kind of woman for their family name. Amara typed nothing back. She stared at the screen until it dimmed, her expression sinking into something unreadable. Her father watched her with tired knowing. He had seen the strain long before she admitted it to herself. "Amara," he whispered again, voice hoarse. She turned back quickly, gripping his hand. "I'm here, Dad, I'm right here." His fingers pressed weakly against hers. "Do not trust them, Amara." The words struck the air like a blade. Amara stilled completely. "Dad," she breathed, unsure if he meant Yiwon's family, or someone else entirely. But his eyes had already closed, drained from the effort. The room felt heavier now, as though the shadows themselves had leaned closer. Amara held his hand tighter, her heart beating with a new, uneasy rhythm she didn't yet understand. Outside the bedroom, her phone buzzed again, longer this time, almost as if warning her that Yiwon's world would soon collide with hers in a way she wasn't ready for. And somewhere toward the back of the house, she thought she heard a soft thud, like a side door closing, a faint sound out of place at this late hour. For a second she froze, listening, but the noise faded and the monitor's weak beeps filled the silence again. She told herself it was just the wind. She didn't yet know it was the first sign that someone else had taken an interest in what her father had been protecting for her. The laughter hit Amara like a slap the moment she stepped through the front doors of the Shin compound. Loud, carefree, completely out of place. She froze in the entryway, the sound dragging her out of the heavy thoughts she carried from her father's bedside. It was late, later than she had promised Yiwon. She had stayed longer with her father after his breathing scare, making sure he was settled before she left. Her clothes still carried the faint scent of his room. Antiseptic and old aftershave, Yiwon was in the main sitting room, leaning back against the silk cushions as if his entire world had no weight. He was 38 years old, tall, always impeccably dressed, and polished in the particular way of men who expected rooms to rearrange themselves around them. His smile was wide, brighter than anything he had shown Amara in weeks. Across from him sat a woman Amara immediately recognized. Park Soo-yeon, 27 years old, introduced months ago as a family associate. Sleek black hair, sharp eyes, a voice that slid across any room like silk, and far too comfortable inside a home that belonged to Amara. Soo-yeon laughed at something Yiwon said, her hand resting lightly on his knee before she noticed Amara standing at the entryway. She rose smoothly with a practiced warmth. "Amara." She crossed the room with open arms. It has been so long. Her embrace lasted a moment too long, her perfume sharp and floral, heavy enough to cloud the air. A scent that pulled up a memory Amara had pushed away. Months earlier, Yiwon coming home late, his collar carrying that same perfume. She had asked casually. He had answered too quickly, probably someone at a business dinner. She had believed him because she wanted to. Now the scent felt like proof she wasn't ready to hold. Amara pulled back gently. "I didn't know we had company." Yiwon shrugged without looking at her. "You came home late. We didn't think you'd mind." Soo-yeon returned to her seat, this time closer to him than before. Before Amara could respond, precise footsteps approached from the corridor. Madam Shin, 63 years old, draped in dark silk, carrying herself with the particular coldness of a woman who had long ago decided that Amara would never be enough for her son. She crossed her arms as if Amara's arrival were an offense. "Late again," she said, not as a question. "You should be here supporting your husband, not running back and forth to that house every evening." Amara kept her voice calm. "I was with my father. He had a difficult night." His breathing almost stopped. Madam Shin's expression didn't shift. "Yes, we are all aware of your father's condition. Everything cannot always revolve around his illness." Amara swallowed the sting. She didn't want to fight, not here, not now. She was too exhausted to explain bedside vigils to people who had never once asked how Raymond was doing. She set her bag on the table. "I'm going upstairs to change." But as she started down the corridor, she heard Soo-yeon's voice drift behind her, low and warm, directed at Yiwon. This home could be so much more with the right energy in it. Yiwon laughed softly. "That is what I keep saying." Amara's hand tightened at her side. She forced herself to keep walking, refusing to look back. Her chest tightened with something she couldn't name. Fear, anger, confusion. Maybe all three tangled together. Inside the guest wing, she sat on the edge of the bed and let herself breathe. Deep, shaky breaths. She had met Soo-yeon before. It was never a long meeting, always brief, always with Soo-yeon acting a little too warm with Yiwon, a little too casual with Amara, as if Amara were a guest in her own marriage. Was she imagining things? No, something was wrong, deeply wrong. She lay back, staring at the ceiling. Her father's fatting voice echoed in her mind. "Do not trust them, Amara." Her phone buzzed. A message from Yiwon. "You could at least try to be pleasant when we have guests." That was all he had to say after leaving her alone for hours, after letting his mother scold her, after laughing with another woman while her father lay struggling to breathe. She put the phone down without replying. Minutes passed before she heard footsteps in the corridor. 2 sets. Heavy, deliberate ones alongside lighter, quicker ones. Whispers followed. First Yi-won's voice, low and controlled. Just give it time. She won't cause trouble. Then Soo-yeon's, softer but certain. But you said you would talk to her. I am getting tired of waiting. Footsteps moved past the door and toward the far end of the corridor. A door clicked softly. Then Soo-yeon's voice again, barely above a whisper but clear through the walls. She won't be in the picture much longer. Amara's breath caught in her throat. The hallway fell silent. She didn't move. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe for a full second, her father's warning pressed against her chest. Do not trust them. Time crawled. At some point later, when the whispers had faded and the compound had sunk into a heavy, false quiet, Amara heard the side entrance creak open, then close gently. Soft footsteps crossed the courtyard, followed by the faint sound of a car engine starting and pulling away. It sounded like someone leaving without wanting to be seen. Amara stared at the ceiling through the dark, torn between going back to her father's side and collapsing from exhaustion. She didn't know it yet, but by morning, both worlds, her father's and Yi-won's, would collide in a way she could never undo. The phone ringing yanked Amara out of a shallow, restless sleep. Her heart jumped before she even checked the screen. It was the nurse who helped with her father at night. Amara, I'm sorry to wake you. His breathing is getting worse. I think you should come now. That was all it took. Amara grabbed her keys with shaking hands and drove through Seoul's pre-dawn streets, the city still gray and quiet. By the time she burst into her father's room, the door slammed against the wall. The violent sound broke the fragile silence where her father lay. His chest jolted, his breathing catching in a painful gasp. Amara rushed to his bedside, grabbing his hand with both of hers. Dad, I'm here. I'm here, she whispered urgently, fighting panic. His eyelids fluttered, struggling to open. Raymond Johnson, 67 years old, once strong and sharp-minded, now looked as fragile as the thin sheets covering him. The medical monitor beside him beeped irregularly, each sound a reminder that time was slipping faster than she could hold on to. Amara lowered her face close to his so he could see her clearly. I'm not leaving you tonight, she said, her voice cracking. The intensity in the room slowly softened into something quieter, something heavier. Amara sat down, adjusting his blanket, brushing sweat from his forehead. She knew every movement now, every sign of discomfort, every shift of breath. Caring for him had become her whole world these past months. Every time she tried to stay longer at the Shin compound, guilt dragged her back here. A tear rolled down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly. She didn't want him to see her break. He blinked slowly, his eyes holding a silent apology. An apology for leaving her too soon. Amara, his voice was thin, almost lost. I'm right here, Dad, she whispered. His breathing steadied slightly, enough for him to study her face, enough for a flicker of memory to spark in both of them. Without warning, the room began to fill with echoing flashes, their shared past rising like soft waves. Amara at 5, sitting on Raymond's lap, learning how to write her name, his warm hand guiding her smaller one. That's it. Slow and steady. Your name means something. Never sign it carelessly. Amara at 12, after her mother passed, Raymond sitting beside her with 2 cups of warm cocoa. You're stronger than you realize, he whispered into her hair. Amara at 20, learning how to read financial documents, Raymond pointing at each line with patient precision. People will try to confuse you, Amara. Always know what belongs to you, Raymond sealing a thick letter, writing carefully on the front. For Amara only. Locking it inside a folder she didn't know existed, then sliding that folder into a locked briefcase he kept in his study. The same briefcase now sitting in the corner of this room, the present blurred with the warmth of each memory. Amara's grip on his hand tightened. Dad, why did you teach me all of that? She whispered it as if finally asking a question she had never dared to before. Raymond exhaled shakily. His eyes moved toward the briefcase in the corner as if remembering something hidden inside it, something important. Then he looked back at her with a seriousness she hadn't seen in years. Amara, he said softly, Yi-won's family wants what's ours. Her stomach tightened. He lifted a trembling hand, brushing her arm as if trying to pass strength into her. I've kept everything in your name, every property, every account, because I knew one day you would need protection. Amara shook her head gently, trying to calm him. Dad, you should rest. You don't have to think about that now. But his expression sharpened despite the pain. No, listen. His voice grew urgent. Your husband, his mother, they are not what they pretend to be. I saw their intentions long before you noticed the signs. They came to me more than once asking questions about my company, my properties, like they were already counting what would be theirs. Amara's heart dropped. She remembered Soo-yeon's whisper from the night before. She won't be in the picture much longer. She had tried to dismiss it. But now her father's words dug into the same fear. Raymond squeezed her hand with surprising strength. You must protect what I protected for you. His eyes watered, not from sickness but from worry. I trust you more than anyone, he whispered, echoing words he had told her since childhood. Then his breathing changed. A sharp hitch. A painful choke. Dad. Amara stood up quickly, her breath fleeing her chest. Dad, talk to me. What is it? He struggled to lift his head. I need to tell you where the documents are. But the sentence never finished. His breath broke mid-word. His chest seized in a violent, uneven rise. Dad. Amara grabbed him, her voice shaking. Stay with me, please. The monitor let out a sharp warning beep. He tried to speak one more word, but only a weak rasp escaped. Amara's hands shook uncontrollably as she pressed the call button for the nurse and reached for her phone with the other hand, tears blurring her vision. Then his eyes widened, not in fear but in warning. He looked past her toward the bedroom doorway. Amara turned sharply. The hallway was empty, or had someone just slipped out of sight? She heard hurried footsteps further down the corridor, then a latch. A second later, somewhere outside the house, a car engine started. Soft, quick, as if leaving before being noticed. In the stillness that followed, Raymond Johnson's last breath trembled through the room, and something inside Amara broke and hardened at exactly the same time. 3 days later, the world moved on as if nothing had happened. But Amara hadn't. She barely stepped into the funeral hall before it hit her. A wave of harsh whispers that sliced through the air like sharp glass. It wasn't grief. It wasn't sympathy. It was judgment. Dozens of eyes followed her, tracing her steps as if she were a stranger walking into the wrong room. The air felt dense, heavy with unspoken opinions. Her father's portrait stood at the front, framed, gentle, proud, but the warmth she once felt around him didn't reach her here. The intensity of the moment forced her still. She gripped the edge of a chair to keep herself standing. Then she saw them. Yi-won and his family, grouped in a corner like a cluster of polished statues, smirking, whispering, watching her instead of honoring her father. Shin Yi-won looked freshly pressed in his black suit like he was attending an important business meeting, not his wife's father's funeral. Madam Shin sat beside him with her usual cold expression, every inch the composed matriarch, except for the quiet contempt she made no real effort to hide. Yi-won's younger sister, Shin Ja-yoon, 30 years old, stood with her arms folded, chewing gum with little respect for the room she was in. And leaning slightly behind Yi-won, as if she had every right to stand there, was Park Soo-yeon. The whispers weren't truly quiet. They were the kind of low voices people use when they want to be heard but still pretend they are being discreet. She looks pathetic, Ja-yoon said, loud enough for 2 nearby guests to glance over. Madam Shin added without lowering her chin, her father probably left her nothing anyway. That man spent his whole life building something small. Yi-won didn't stop them. He didn't defend her. Instead, he stood with a faint smirk, like a man watching a performance he had already decided the ending of. Amara tried to breathe. She tried to focus on her father's photo, his gentle smile, the one that always told her she wasn't alone. But the voices kept pulling her back into the storm. Yi-won deserves someone who isn't a burden, Madam Shin said, lifting her chin. Someone who understands what this family requires. Her eyes moved briefly toward Soo-yeon as she leaned in toward Yi-won's ear. You could do so much better than her, she murmured, her voice low and poisonous, meant only for him. Amara's chest tightened painfully. She looked at Yi-won. He didn't even look ashamed. He looked entertained. Soo-yeon stepped closer to him, touching his arm as if the entire room wasn't watching. Her fingertips slid down his sleeve in a slow, deliberate movement too familiar to be innocent. She leaned toward his ear. After the funeral, she whispered, you need to make a decision. Amara's heart throbbed. It wasn't just the touch. It wasn't just the whisper. It was the perfume. That same sharply sweet scent she had found on Yi-won's collar months ago. That same smile she had noticed when he came home late. That same voice she had heard through the walls 2 nights before her father died. Everything clicked. All the moments she had brushed off, all the doubts she had pushed down, they collided into a truth she could no longer hide from. Her knees weakened, the world around her blurred. She steadied herself against the side of a wooden pew as memories hit her like quiet lightning. Yi-won coming home late. Soo-yeon's hand resting on his knee in their own sitting room. Soo-yeon's voice through the wall. She won't be in the picture much longer. Her father's last warning. Yi-won's family wants what's ours. Amara swallowed hard, forcing the tears back. She would not fall apart here. not in front of them. Not in front of people waiting for her to crumble. She walked to the front where her father's portrait stood. She touched the frame lightly, whispering inside her heart, "I'm sorry you have to see me like this." For a brief moment, the room quieted. A soft memory settled over her. The nights she sat with her father reading, talking, laughing through pain. His voice echoed gently. "Strength isn't loud, Amara. It's steady." She exhaled slowly. Then footsteps approached behind her. Heavy, impatient. Yiwon reached her and took her hand, not gently, not lovingly. His grip was firm in the way of a man used to being obeyed. He leaned close, his voice low and sharp. "Don't embarrass me today." His words crashed into her like a cold wave. Embarrass him? This was her father's funeral. The man who raised her alone. The man who protected her his entire life. And Yiwon wanted her to behave. Amara tried to pull her hand free. Yiwon tightened his grip until her fingers ached. His mother glanced over with thinly veiled impatience. Soo-yeon watched with quiet satisfaction, like a spectator who already knew how the scene would end. And then a sudden hush fell over the room. Someone new had entered the hall. Amara turned slightly, her breath catching when she recognized the dark suit and the solemn expression. Mr. Ellis, her father's attorney, flown in from Atlanta. He walked toward her slowly, carrying a sealed folder under his arm, and his eyes were locked on Amara as if he knew something the others didn't. Like he was carrying the message her father never got to finish. A message that would break everything open. Amara shut the bedroom door behind her with force, her breath unsteady, her hands trembling so badly she had to grip the dresser to stay upright. The humiliation from the funeral still burned inside her. Yiwon's cruel grip. Soo-yeon's whisper. Madam Shin's smirk. All of it stacked on top of her grief like weights crushing her chest. She had come straight back to her father's house after the funeral, claiming she needed to sort his things. Yiwon hadn't argued. He was too busy speaking in low tones with his mother and Soo-yeon near Mr. Ellis, watching the attorney with eyes that were already calculating. The moment she stepped into her father's room, the noise of the hall felt miles away. But something else burned too, her father's warning. "Do not trust them, Amara." The intensity of his voice, so weak and yet so urgent, echoed in her mind until it drowned out every other thought. She forced herself to move, to breathe, to do anything except fall apart. She crossed the room and sank into the chair beside her father's empty bed. Everything in this room held his presence. The faint scent of his aftershave, the stack of books he never got to finish, the small framed photo of her mother on the table. A briefcase in the corner that she remembered from childhood but had never seen fully open. She began gathering his belongings with gentle hands, organizing them into small piles. Each object carried a story. His glasses, the watch he had worn for decades, the pen he used to sign every important document. Then she noticed something wedged behind a stack of books on the second shelf. An envelope, cream-colored, unopened, written in her father's careful handwriting. For Amara only, her breath caught. She picked it up slowly, running her thumb along the sealed edge as if she were touching something sacred. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a folded letter, handwritten in blue ink. Amara unfolded it carefully, afraid the words might fall apart if she rushed. The first line stole her breath. "My dear Amara, if you are reading this, it means I have left you sooner than I wanted." Her throat tightened. She blinked away tears and read on. "I need you to know that I have ensured your future is safe. Everything I built, everything I protected, all of it is yours. You will understand the details soon. There are people around you who are not what they pretend to be. Do not let Yiwon's family near any documents. They have always wanted control, not love. I have already signed the final version of my will with Mr. Ellis. He knows exactly what to do." Amara's stomach twisted. Her father had known. He had seen through them long before she did. Another flash of memory surfaced. A conversation she had forgotten until now. Her father at the kitchen table years ago, sipping coffee and watching her over the rim of his cup. "Remember this, Amara," he said softly. "Greedy people reveal themselves during funerals. That's when the masks fall off." She hadn't understood then. Now she understood it completely. Amara pressed the letter to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks, not just from grief but from clarity. Her father had been protecting her even in his last days. He had been preparing her for the very moment she faced today. She wiped her tears and reached for her phone. She called the only person who could answer the questions burning inside her. Mr. Ellis picked up on the first ring. "Mr. Ellis," Amara whispered. "I found a letter from my father. He said you would explain everything. He mentioned the will." There was a long pause on the other end, a heavy pause, the kind that held secrets. Then his voice, low and steady. "I'm glad you found that letter, Amara. Your father asked me to wait until after the funeral before we read anything official. You need to come tomorrow. There are things you don't know." Her pulse quickened. What things? He exhaled slowly, as if choosing his words. Things your father kept hidden to protect you. The will. The changes he made in his final months. And another message he left with me. Separate from the one you're holding. He paused. And whatever happens tonight, do not let anyone near your father's documents or that briefcase in his room. Yi-won's family has already tried to ask questions they have no right to ask. The line went quiet. Outside the room, a floorboard creaked. Slow, deliberate, as if someone was standing just beyond the door and had been there long enough to hear something they shouldn't. Amara's breath hitched. She turned her head toward the doorway. The corridor was empty. But she had learned by now that empty corridors in the Shin world did not always mean she was alone. Someone knew more than they should. And tomorrow, when the will was read, they would all find out exactly what Raymond Johnson had done. The morning exploded with noise before Amara even opened her eyes. Doors slammed. Voices clashed in the corridor. Footsteps stomped across the floor like a small storm building outside her room. Amara. Yi-won's voice thundered through the door. Get dressed. We leave in an hour. She shot upright, heart racing. She opened the door slowly. Yi-won stood in the corridor already in a dark suit, hair swept back, jaw clenched with the particular impatience of a man used to being obeyed without question. Behind him stood Madam Shin, arms folded, chin raised, wearing black in a way that somehow managed to look more judgmental than mournful. And beside them, to Amara's quiet shock, was Park Soo-yeon. Dressed in understated black, small handbag in hand, standing in her father's house with the ease of a woman who had already decided she belonged there. Amara froze for a moment, not expecting to see Soo-yeon at all. Yi-won noticed her expression immediately. She's coming with us, he said quickly. She has been supporting me while you have been otherwise occupied. Taking care of her dying father. Amara said nothing. Soo-yeon stepped forward, touching Yi-won's arm with light, familiar fingers. We are all here for you, Yi-won, she said, deliberately loud enough. Today is a lot. You shouldn't have to carry it alone. Madam Shin nodded as if Soo-yeon were the daughter-in-law she had always wanted. Exactly. Today is important. We need to understand what Raymond left behind and how it concerns this family. Amara's breath tightened. How it concerns this family. Her father had spent his life building something, and these people were already treating it like an inheritance they were owed. She dressed silently, choosing a plain black blouse and dark slacks. The mirror reflected tired eyes, but something else too. Something her father had always told her was there. She thought of Mr. Ellis's words from the night before. Do not let anyone near the briefcase. She crossed the room, lifted the briefcase carefully, and placed it with her own bag. She would not be leaving it behind. While getting ready, she also made one quiet call to a separate attorney in the firm Mr. Ellis had recommended. The conversation was brief and purposeful. The document she slid into her bag before leaving the room was thin, crisp, marked with a legal letterhead. She had made a decision in the dark, without asking anyone's permission, and it was already done. The drive to Mr. Ellis's office in Central Seoul was wrapped in a suffocating silence. Yi-won stared out the window, tapping his thumb against his knee. Soo-yeon sat beside him, exchanging quiet glances that she didn't bother to fully conceal. Madam Shin sat rigid, composed, already certain of what she expected to walk away with. Amara kept her gaze fixed on the city passing outside, Seoul's glass towers catching the morning light. She had lived here for 3 years, and today it felt, for the first time, like a place she was finally leaving. Mr. Ellis met them at the door of the law office. He greeted Amara first with a quiet nod that carried the weight of 30 years of loyalty to her father. Then he took in the group trailing behind her, and his expression remained carefully composed. Mr. Johnson specifically requested, he said evenly, that the reading take place with all parties present who might attempt to exert influence over these proceedings. Yi-won stepped forward before anyone else could speak. Of course we are here. This is a family matter. Soo-yeon is a close associate and a support. Mr. Ellis offered a thin, polite smile and led them inside. The conference room held a long wooden table. A thick folder sat at the center alongside a small stack of sealed envelopes. Yi-won took the head of the table without asking. Soo-yeon settled beside him, crossing her legs with practiced ease. Madam Shin sat on his other side. Amara took the seat at the far end of the table, directly across from Mr. Ellis. She didn't need to sit close. Her father had already prepared the truth. Madam Shin leaned back in her chair and looked around the room with quiet satisfaction. Finally, she said, we will have some clarity. Raymond was a difficult man to deal with toward the end. Soo-yeon tilted her head slightly. Long overdue, if you ask me. Amara's jaw tightened, but she kept her face still. She rested her hand lightly on her bag, feeling the weight of the document inside. Mr. Ellis opened the folder without acknowledging either of them. "There is something I must read first," he said. Mr. Johnson left a private message for his daughter, to be read aloud in front of everyone present before anything else is discussed. Yi-won leaned forward. "We can skip the sentiment and move directly to the legal." Mr. Ellis raised one hand. Gently, completely. Then he lifted a sealed document marked in Raymond Johnson's careful handwriting and broke the seal. The room stilled. He began to read, "To my beloved daughter, Amara." The room went instantly silent. Yi-won stopped tapping. Soo-yeon straightened. Madam Shin's lips pressed into a thin line. "You have been my greatest comfort, my peace, my pride. Everything I built was always meant for you." Amara blinked, tears burning at the edges of her eyes. "Even now, even gone." Her father's voice felt like home, but the rest of the room was already cracking. Mr. Ellis continued. "I changed my will months ago after seeing things I hoped I would never witness. I saw the truth of the people surrounding you. I saw the cruelty, the greed, the disrespect shown toward you even while you cared for me with every part of your heart." Madam Shin bristled. He misunderstood what Mr. Ellis raised his hand again. "Please allow me to finish." He turned the page. "Yi-won once spoke about me as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience. I was resting in my room one afternoon, weeks before I passed, when I heard voices in the corridor. Yi-won and his mother, speaking as if they were already planning. They believed I was sleeping. Yi-won said, and I am quoting his exact words, 'When the old man is finally gone, everything comes to us anyway. He's just a walking expense we have been managing.'" A sharp gasp slipped from one of the junior staff standing near the back wall. Someone in the corridor outside the glass partition stopped walking. Yi-won's face went completely white. His mouth opened, but no words formed. Madam Shin turned to look at her son. Her eyes were not sympathetic. They were furious. Mr. Ellis did not pause. After hearing those words, I made my final decision, with complete clarity and full legal counsel. He lifted the last page. "I leave my entire estate. Every account, every property, every share of my company that remains under my ownership to my daughter, Amara Johnson. To her alone." The room fractured. Yi-won lunged to his feet. "This is not possible. There must be a mistake somewhere in these documents." Mr. Ellis closed the letter without flinching. "There is no mistake. Mr. Johnson transferred the majority of his assets into Amara's name months before his passing and confirmed all remaining rights in this final will. I prepared and witnessed the documents myself." Yi-won had never asked the right questions. He had never read the documents Raymond sent. He had assumed. Until this moment, he had no idea his wife already legally owned almost everything he had been counting on. Soo-yeon's composed smile vanished completely. Her hands gripped the armrests. Madam Shin hissed he wouldn't do this. He knew we were family through this marriage. Mr. Ellis calmly closed the folder. Mr. Johnson was very clear about who he trusted. He asked that everyone be present precisely so there would be no confusion and no room for rumors afterward. Yi-won turned to Amara, fury and fear fighting each other across his face. "Did you know about this?" Amara met his gaze without flinching. "No, but my father tried to warn me." A low ripple of whispers moved across the room from the staff standing near the walls. Yi-won swallowed hard. "This changes nothing between us." Soo-yeon cut in sharply, her voice unraveling at the edges. "It changes everything." She looked at Yi-won with an expression that had nothing left of warmth in it. "You told me this was handled. You told me once her father was gone the finances would shift and we would have room to." Yi-won shot her a hard look. "Not here." But Soo-yeon had already gone too far to stop. "So what now? We simply lose everything we planned for." Madam Shin slammed her palm against the table. "This cannot be legally sound. We will contest it. It is entirely sound," Mr. Ellis replied. "The documents were signed months ago, witnessed, filed, and registered. Your son had ample time to ask questions. He chose not to." Yi-won's breath turned shallow. For the first time since Amara had known him, the man who commanded rooms, who made powerful men step aside, looked truly afraid. Amara watched him quietly. In that moment, something inside her settled, something strong, something her father had always believed she carried. Then she reached into her bag. Her movements were calm and deliberate. She pulled out the white envelope marked with the law firm's letterhead and slid it across the long table toward Yi-won. His hand hovered above it. "What is this?" Amara looked at him steadily. "Read it." He opened it. His fingers went still. His eyes moved across the page once. Then again, divorce papers. Silence crashed over the room like a wave hitting stone. Soo-yeon's jaw dropped. Madam Shin's breath caught audibly. Ja-yoon, who had been sitting quietly near the wall, pressed her hand over her mouth. Yi-won looked up from the page. His expression moved through disbelief, then anger, then something smaller and more exposed than either. Something Amara had never seen on his face before. Amara stood slowly, and before she turned toward the door, she said, with a quiet and absolute steadiness, "I will not be used anymore." The room froze. But as she stepped into the corridor, she heard Mr. Ellis's voice behind her, calm and certain. "Amara, there is still one more document your father left. We will discuss it when you are ready. It concerns the company and a decision your father made about its future." She paused for just a moment, letting the weight of that settle. Then she kept walking. She barely made it 3 steps down the corridor before she heard the thunder of footsteps behind her. "Amara." Yi-won's voice cracked with a panic she had never heard from him in all the years she had known him. He grabbed her wrist, breathless, stripped completely of the composure he had worn like armor his entire life. "We can fix this," he said, his voice shaking. "You don't have to do this. We can figure things out. I just need time." Amara looked at him, not with anger, with something quieter. Something closer to pity. "Fix what, Yi-won?" she asked calmly. "Were you planning to fix things with me, or with her?" His jaw dropped. His face drained, caught completely. He stuttered. "I don't know what you think you." Amara stepped closer until her eyes were level with his. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but every word landed clean. "I heard enough." His grip on her wrist loosened. For the first time since she had married into this world, Shin Yi-won looked like a man with nothing left to stand on. Before he could speak again, a sharp ringtone cut through the corridor. Soo-yeon appeared from the conference room doorway, phone already at her ear. Her expression wasn't devastated. It was irritated, the look of a woman whose plans had simply been inconvenienced. She turned slightly away, lowering her voice, but not enough. "Yes, I'm handling it now." "No, the situation changed. He won't have access to anything worth having." "Yes, I'll be ready when you are." Yi-won's breath hitched. He stared at Soo-yeon as she ended the call and turned back toward them, straightening the front of her jacket with composed hands. "Yi-won," she said, her voice carrying a finality that had nothing left of warmth in it. "I think this is the moment we should both be honest." His voice cracked. "Soo-yeon, what was that call?" She sighed, not dramatically, but with the patience of someone explaining something to a person who should have understood it sooner. "You told me that once her father was gone, we would have access to resources that would let us build something real. You promised me a future, Yi-won." She glanced briefly toward Amara, then back at him. "But you don't have anything now. And I have received an offer from someone who actually can deliver what was promised." Yi-won stared at her. "You're leaving?" It wasn't a question. It came out like something breaking. Soo-yeon lifted her bag from the nearby table. "Be serious, Yi-won. You have nothing left to offer me." She turned and walked past him as if he were a stranger, her heels hitting the corridor floor in sharp, deliberate clicks. At the far door, she paused without turning back. "Next time, don't make promises built on someone else's foundation." And then she was gone. Yi-won stood in the corridor, both hands pressed against the sides of his head, breathing hard. The man who ran boardrooms, who moved quietly through Seoul's most dangerous networks, who had never once in Amara's presence looked anything less than in complete control. He looked destroyed, not by her, by his own choices, his own greed, his own blindness. Amara watched him and felt nothing she didn't expect to feel. No satisfaction, no cruelty, just the clean, quiet recognition of truth. Madam Shin's voice shattered the silence. She came storming down the corridor, her composure completely fractured for the first time. "Yi-won, what have you done?" Her voice was ice and fury in equal measure. "You let everything slip away. We tolerated that woman and her father for years because we believed." She stopped herself, but the word hung between all of them. "Tolerated?" Amara looked at her steadily. The mask was completely off now. No careful phrasing, no elegant contempt, just the naked truth of what Madam Shin had always thought of her. Madam Shin turned to Amara with sudden desperation replacing the fury. "Emily, think of what this family..." "Amara," she said quietly but firmly. "My name is Amara." Madam Shin faltered. Yi-won grabbed his mother's arm. Before the argument could spiral further, Mr. Ellis appeared at the corridor entrance. He addressed Yi-won with the same measured calm he had maintained throughout the entire morning. "Mr. Shin." Mr. Johnson made his legal arrangements with absolute clarity and proper documentation months before his passing. "You have no claim to his estate. The will has been filed and is already in the process of being executed." Yi-won stared, helpless, his jaw tight, his eyes red at the edges. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he turned to look at Amara one last time. His voice came out low, almost unrecognizable. "You know I never meant for it to go this far." Amara held his gaze. "You meant every part of it, Yi-won. You just didn't expect it to cost you anything." She turned back to Mr. Ellis and nodded. I'll be in contact about next steps. He nodded back. Of course. The divorce proceedings and all related matters will be handled through the court. Everything is already in motion. Amara picked up her bag. As she turned toward the exit, her mind drifted briefly to the briefcase she had taken from her father's room that morning. The one he had always kept close. The one he had rested his hand on and said, "If anything ever happens to me, this holds the rest." Something else was coming. Something beyond the estate. Something about what her father had wanted her life to actually look like once all of this was behind her. And for the first time, she felt ready to hear it. The gavel struck the courtroom table so hard the sound cut through the room like something final. Order. Everyone near Amara stiffened. She didn't. She sat perfectly still at her table, hands folded, eyes steady, waiting for the last piece of truth to settle into place. Weeks had passed since the will reading. Yiwon had refused to accept the outcome quietly. He had challenged portions of the will, attempted to delay the asset transfers through procedural motions, and dragged the divorce proceedings into a sole courtroom, still convinced that somewhere in the paperwork there was a crack he could force open. His attorneys were expensive. His confidence had returned, brittle and performative, the way it does in men who have always believed that enough pressure applied in the right place eventually gives way. It didn't give way today. Yiwon sat at the opposing table looking nothing like the man he had spent years performing himself to be. His suit was immaculate out of habit, but his face was pale and his hands, the same hands that had gripped hers too tightly at her father's funeral, were still. Madame Shin sat in the gallery behind him with the frozen expression of a woman who had built an entire identity on certainty and was watching it dissolve. Their family attorney shuffled papers with the quiet discomfort of someone who already knew how this would end. Mr. Ellis stood beside Amara's Korean legal counsel, calm and prepared, holding a binder that contained everything Raymond Johnson had documented with the careful precision of a man who had known exactly what kind of people he was dealing with. The judge reviewed the documents before him. We will now hear the supporting evidence in the matter of the estate dispute and the divorce filing. Yiwon's attorney rose. Your Honor, the circumstances surrounding the asset transfers in the months prior to Mr. Johnson's passing raise legitimate questions about. The judge raised a hand. The documentation will speak for itself. Mr. Ellis. Mr. Ellis opened the binder. What you will see today, Your Honor, are not accusations. They are facts, documented carefully by Mr. Raymond Johnson himself and supported by evidence gathered in the months since his passing. He placed the first set of documents on the evidence display. Financial records. Clean, precise, dated. Every transfer of assets into Amara's name, months before Raymond passed, each one witnessed, notarized, and filed through proper legal channels. A complete and unbroken paper trail that left nothing open to interpretation. Yiwon's attorney tried again. The timing of these transfers suggests undue influence from. Your Honor, Mr. Ellis responded without raising his voice. Mr. Johnson's physician has provided a signed statement confirming he was of full and clear mental capacity at the time of every transfer. We have that statement in the documentation before you. The judge nodded. Continue. Next came the photographs. Images that Amara had not seen before this morning, that Mr. Ellis had presented to her briefly before the session began. Yiwon with Soo-yeon, hands intertwined, private dinners at restaurants across Seoul. A weekend in Busan documented across 2 days, each image date-stamped, each one placed within the timeline of Amara's marriage, each one taken while she was sitting beside her father's bed. A hush moved through the courtroom gallery. Yiwon's posture changed. Something in his shoulders collapsed forward slightly, just slightly, but enough for anyone watching to see it. Those were taken without. Mr. Ellis continued calmly. Following the photographs, Your Honor, we have documented communications. He placed printed records on the display. Text exchanges between Yiwon and Park Soo-yeon spanning 18 months. Plans, arrangements, messages that discussed Amara in terms that removed any ambiguity about intention. One exchange in particular, dated 3 weeks before Raymond Johnson passed, in which Yiwon wrote, "Once the old man is gone and the money situation clarifies, we can finally move properly." Soo-yeon's response, also in the record, "Once he's out of the picture, we won't have to be careful anymore." A sound came from the gallery. Someone exhaling too sharply. Yiwon buried his face briefly in one hand. His attorney placed a steadying hand on his arm but said nothing. Amara sat still. She had known. She had suspected. Hearing the words read aloud in a courtroom under fluorescent light felt less like a wound and more like the closing of one. The last confirmation of what she had already survived. Mr. Ellis lifted a single sheet of paper. And finally, Your Honor, this letter was written by Mr. Raymond Johnson 6 weeks before his passing and signed in front of 2 witnesses. He read aloud, I am deeply concerned for my daughter's safety and her future. Her husband has shown a consistent disregard for her well-being and has spoken of me as though I were nothing more than a financial obstacle. I fear what he will attempt to claim when I am gone. I have taken every legal step available to me to ensure my daughter is protected. I trust the courts to honor what I have put in place. The courtroom was completely silent. The judge reviewed the final stack of documents before him, his expression unreadable but attentive. He looked up after a long moment. Is the letter signed, witnessed, and verified? Yes, Your Honor. And the financial records confirm that all assets belonging to Raymond Johnson were transferred into Amara Johnson's name prior to his passing, with no assets held jointly with her promise to the respondent, Mr. Ellis responded without hesitation. Every asset, every account, every property, all of it in Amara's name before Mr. Johnson passed. The will confirmed any residual rights. The respondent was excluded entirely and deliberately. The judge set the papers down. He looked at Yiwon's table for a moment, then across at Amara. Then the court recognizes the will and all accompanying financial documentation as valid and binding. The estate belongs in full to Amara Johnson. Amara closed her eyes for just a moment. One breath, long enough to feel her father's presence, long enough to recognize that he had done exactly what he promised. He had protected her. The judge was not finished. As for the divorce proceedings, he said, lifting the second file, the evidence presented today documents a sustained pattern of infidelity, financial manipulation, and deliberate exploitation of the petitioner. He looked down at the papers, then stamped them with a firm and final sound. The divorce is hereby granted. A quiet sound came from Yiwon's side of the room. Not a word, just the sound of something ending. Amara opened her eyes. The world on the other side of that sound was different from the one she had entered this room in, smaller in some ways, cleaner in every way that mattered. Mr. Ellis placed a hand briefly on her shoulder before stepping back. She nodded at him. Around them the gallery murmured. She could hear fragments. She deserved none of that. He only ever wanted the money. Good for her, standing quietly. Good for her. Her father would have sat in that gallery with his arms folded and his chin up and said nothing at all. He wouldn't have needed to. Amara stood, collected her bag, and walked toward the exit with the same quiet steadiness she had learned from him. But before she reached the doors, she heard rapid footsteps behind her. Amara. Yiwon's voice had lost every layer of polish. He reached her in the corridor outside the courtroom, breathing hard, his composure entirely gone. There was no performance left. No calculation. Just a man who had built everything on what he thought he could take and was now standing in the wreckage of that choice. Please, he said. His voice broke on the single word. Please don't end it like this. I have nothing left now. Nothing. Amara turned to face him slowly. She looked at him for a long moment. The man she had married. The man she had believed in longer than she should have. The man who had stood at her father's funeral and worried about appearances. You chose this, she said quietly. Every single part of it. He reached for her arm. Before he could make contact, a firm hand came down on his wrist. Mr. Ellis. Standing exactly where he needed to be, stepped back, the attorney said without raising his voice. You have no claim here. The court has decided. Yiwon looked at Mr. Ellis, then back at Amara. Something in his face finally accepted what the documents had already confirmed. She was not coming back. She was not going to soften. She was not the woman who would absorb his choices and continue carrying them for him. She was Raymond Johnson's daughter. And Raymond Johnson had raised her to know exactly what belonged to her. Amara turned and walked toward the courthouse doors. The Seoul morning met her on the other side with cool, clean air and pale gold light pressing through the clouds above the city. She stood at the top of the courthouse steps and let it reach her. Her hands, which had trembled at bedsides and across cold tables and through long nights of doubt, were completely still at her sides. She thought of him, his voice in a small Atlanta kitchen on an ordinary afternoon. Strength isn't loud, Amara. It's steady. It's quiet. And it lasts. She had stood through grief that came too fast and betrayal dressed too carefully to recognize at first. She had stood in a room full of people who had counted her as nothing before her father had even finished dying. She had stood at a funeral where her own husband told her not to embarrass him, and she was still standing. Behind her, Muffled by the heavy courthouse doors, she could hear the sound of the Shin family coming apart without her there to absorb it. Madam Shin's voice, no longer composed, turning its fury toward her son. Yiwon's silence. The particular quiet of a man discovering there is no one left to be powerful for. Amara did not go back. She walked down the steps slowly, the way her father had taught her to do everything that mattered. Deliberately. As if each step meant something, at the bottom she paused. In her bag, next to the now-settled divorce documents, was the unopened final envelope Mr. Ellis had handed her before she left the building. Her father's last document. The one with the company crest pressed into the seal. The one Mr. Ellis had described simply as the decision your father made about who he trusted to carry it forward. She already had a feeling she knew what it said, because she was her father's daughter. And Raymond Johnson had never once, in all her years, underestimated her. She pressed the envelope gently between her hands, looking out at Seoul's skyline catching the morning light. Then she opened it. If you made it to the end of this story, I want to ask you something. Amara lost everything that was supposed to protect her and discovered that what actually protected her had been there all along. Have you ever been counted out by someone who later had to watch you rise? Drop your answer in the comments right now. I read every single one. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you are new here, welcome to Black Stories. Subscribe and come back. There is so much more where this came from. See you in the next one.